On my 18th birthday, my parents handed me a vanilla cake, then told me I was adopted. But I already knew. 3 weeks earlier, a girl in a DNA chat said we shared 28% of our DNA, and her aunt had a daughter who disappeared. That daughter was me. I'm Emma, and this is the story of how I uncovered the truth, met the mother they tried to erase, and found out my life was part of something much darker than I ever imagined. Have you ever felt like something about your family just didn't add up, or found out a truth that changed everything? Let me know in the comments, because sometimes the truth finds you before you're ready. Mom had already set the table when I walked into the kitchen. Pancakes, blueberries, a flicker of birthday effort. She smiled at me like she wanted to be seen smiling. "Happy 18th, M," she said, the spatula still in her hand. Her voice was just a touch too bright, like someone trying to fill in silence they didn't understand. I nodded, offering her a small smile in return. "Thanks, Mom." Dad was in his usual spot, coffee in hand, newspaper open. He didn't say anything right away. When he did, it was one sentence, like he'd rehearsed it. "Big day, huh?" "Yeah," I said, sitting down. My fork hovered over the plate, then dropped with a soft clink. What I really wanted was to go back upstairs, open my phone, and reread the message. Again, I joined the Ancestry Reddit group out of boredom. My DNA test had come back last week, and there wasn't much to see. Some percentages, some regional breakdowns, and one match that didn't make any sense. Cassidy Rowan. She'd messaged me just after midnight. "Hey, this might sound weird, but we share 28% DNA. Are you adopted?" I stared at it for 10 minutes before replying. "Not that I know of." Then the typing dots. Then a pause. "I think we might be cousins. My aunt, Laya Rowan, had a daughter 18 years ago. She was put up for adoption under weird circumstances. My mom never talked about it, but my grandma let it slip once." Another pause. "She said the baby disappeared." The pancakes were warm, sweet, a little overcooked around the edges. I cut into them slowly, chewing without tasting. Mom watched me with this tight kind of anticipation, like she was waiting for something. Maybe gratitude, maybe confirmation that her effort had landed. I swallowed and pushed the plate slightly away. "It's good. Thanks." She nodded too quickly. Dad didn't look up. I couldn't stop glancing toward the window. The rain had started again, soft, steady, and oddly comforting. Oregon always had a way of making everything look a little gray around the edges, like life was always halfway through a watercolor. After breakfast, I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and opened my laptop. Cassidy had sent another message. "Sorry if I freaked you out. Just figured it was worth saying something." I stared at my own profile. Name: Emma Carter. No birth parents listed, no history prior to 2004. Just adopted in tiny letters under legal notes, something I hadn't noticed before. My bedroom had always felt like a halfway space. The walls were painted a muted blue. My bookshelf was lined with paperbacks I'd read and reread. There were fairy lights over the headboard and a small cactus on the nightstand that I watered every Sunday out of habit. But there were no family photos. None. Not because I didn't have them, because I'd never wanted to hang them. There was always something off about the three of us, like we were a portrait hung in the wrong house. I messaged Cassidy back. "What happened to Lila?" She replied almost instantly. "She disappeared. Mental hospital, I think. The Rowans never talked about it." That was the moment my throat went tight. I sat there, blinking at the screen, hearing the echo of that sentence in my mind. Mental hospital, disappeared. Who puts a child up for adoption and then vanishes? I stared out my bedroom window. The neighbor's dog was barking at nothing. The street was slick with rain, and the sky looked like it had forgotten how to be blue. I didn't know exactly what I felt in that moment. Not fear, not sadness. Something deeper. Like the ground underneath me had always been hollow, and I'd just heard the crack. I grabbed a notebook from my drawer and scribbled down the name. Laya Rowan. Then I circled it. In my reflection on the dark glass, I saw something unfamiliar, a version of myself that was starting to wake up. Maybe I wasn't who I thought I was. Maybe I'd never been, but maybe, just maybe, I could find out. I whispered the name once, just to try it on. Lila? Then I said the words out loud for the first time, like they were mine to carry. I think I'm Lila's daughter. I took the long way home, past the park where I used to swing too high as a kid, past the tiny post office that always smelled like wet envelopes. I needed the air. I needed the silence between footsteps to make sense of what I'd read. Lila Rowan. A stranger. A maybe mother. I didn't want answers. I needed them. The sky above Portland had gone from gray to grayer. A chill hung in the air like the clouds had dropped a warning instead of rain. I walked slower than usual, but still too fast. My thoughts chased each other, no finish line in sight. When I opened the front door, the scent hit me first. Vanilla. It was thick, warm, almost inviting, if you didn't know better. I followed it to the kitchen and stopped. The cake was sitting there like it had been placed with purpose, perfectly round, frosting smooth just so, no candles, just sugar and silence. Mom stood beside it, hands clasped like she was at a funeral. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Surprise," she said, voice too soft. Dad was seated at the table, tapping his watch face like it might reveal the time he wanted instead of the time it was. He looked up once, nodded. That was it. I said nothing. "I thought you might like a cake," Mom added, as if that explained the tightness in her voice or the weight in the room. "Vanilla's your favorite." Was it? I sat down slowly. My fingertips touched the edge of the plate, but I didn't pick up the fork. The silence was louder than it had been all morning. They exchanged a glance. Dad cleared his throat. "Emma, there's something we need to talk to you about." I didn't flinch. I'd already heard them the night before, through the crack in my door. Mom had whispered, "We can't keep hiding it." Dad had replied with something about timing, so now it was time. "You were adopted," Mom said. "No let-up, no building, just a fact dropped on the table like a napkin." I blinked. "You came to us when you were 2, Dad continued, rubbing the side of his neck. "It was private, no agency, no court mess." "We did what we thought was right," Mom said, hands tightening in her lap. I looked at them, at the cake, at the clock on the wall that ticked far too slow. "You waited until my birthday to tell me?" Dad leaned forward, elbows on the table. "We thought you were ready." I looked down at the plate. The frosting had started to melt slightly near the base. It looked like it was trying to escape. "We also think," Mom said carefully, "that it's time you take the next step." Dad reached under the table and pulled out a small duffel bag, green canvas, worn handles. "There's a hostel downtown," he said, setting it on the floor next to me. "We've paid for 1 week, enough time to find a job, get your bearings." I stared at the bag. It looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was bigger now. My fingers went cold, but I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I stood up slowly, picked up the bag, and looked at them one last time. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me, eventually." Mom looked like she wanted to reach for my hand, but she didn't. Her fingers twitched, then folded into her lap. Dad looked back at his watch, as if counting down to something else. The cake sat between us, untouched. I turned, walked out the door, and didn't look back. The air outside hit me like a wall, damp, real, free. As I walked toward the bus stop, the scent of vanilla still clung to my jacket like something I hadn't asked to carry. In my coat pocket, I felt the printout again, Cassidy's message, and the grainy photo she'd sent me this morning, a woman in her 30s, hair pulled back, eyes soft but sharp. The caption read, "Doctor, Lila Rowan, psychiatric specialist, my maybe mother, my maybe truth." I didn't know where this road would end, but for the first time in years, I knew I wasn't standing still. Hostel mattresses feel like regret. They're too thin to forget anything. I lay there for hours with my coat still on, the duffel bag under my arm like some kind of anchor. I didn't sleep. I waited. At first light, I walked to the only place I could think of where truth lived in ink instead of memory, the Portland Central Library. It was still quiet when I stepped inside. The kind of quiet that hums, not the kind that echoes. The scent of old paper mixed with disinfectant, like wisdom scrubbed clean. I went straight to the research section, to the microfilm station tucked away near the back where nobody ever bothers to look anymore. I hadn't touched microfilm since 8th grade history class, but somehow it felt right. Like old secrets demanded old tools. I logged in, fingers still trembling a little, and typed, Lila Rowan. Nothing came up at first, so I tried different terms. Doctor. L. Rowan, Psychiatrist, Portland, 2004. Rowan Wellness Foundation scandal. A few scattered mentions, then one article. Psychiatrist commits suicide after whistleblowing attempt. Fails. I froze. The article was from 19 years ago. It showed a black and white photo of a young woman in a white coat, her face blurred from a bad scan, but her eyes visible. Sharp, sad, strong. Lila Rowan. But as I read further, something didn't sit right. The article said she had filed a report accusing a medical foundation of unethical behavior. Then, within a month, she had a mental breakdown, was hospitalized, and later declared dead from a suspected overdose. No obituary, no memorial service, no follow-up, just disappeared. Except it didn't say confirmed deceased, it said committed to long-term psychiatric care. I leaned back in my chair, breathing shallow, heart pounding. I looked again. The Rowan Wellness Foundation. Still operational, and under significant donors, one name caught my eye. Gregory Carter, my adoptive father. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my notebook, the one I'd brought from home. I flipped to the back, wrote the name in all caps, Silver Pine Institute, the place where Lila had supposedly been committed. My hands shook slightly as I circled it over and over until the paper threatened to rip. An elderly librarian passed by, pausing for a moment. She smiled softly as if she'd seen that look before, the look of someone whose whole world had shifted in a sentence. "First time in archives?" she asked kindly. "First time chasing a ghost," I said without thinking. She nodded once, not asking more. "Ghosts tend to leave footprints if you know where to look." I thanked her. She moved on. I printed the article, folded it carefully, and slipped it between the pages of my notebook. Then I pulled out my phone and opened Cassidy's messages. "I found her," I typed. "She's alive. I think I'm going to see her." Cassidy replied almost instantly. "Are you serious?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I used the last few dollars in my pocket for a one-way bus ticket to the edge of town. No lunch, just a granola bar I'd found in my bag from 2 days ago. As the bus rumbled away from downtown, I looked up at the sky. It was still that muted Portland gray, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or just hover. I whispered it aloud, the truth blooming slowly in my chest. Silver Pine didn't feel like a hospital. It felt like a place where people were meant to disappear quietly. The fog hugged the hills as I stepped off the bus, my boots hitting the gravel with a crunch that seemed too loud in the still morning. The building sat back behind leafless trees, its brick facade stained by time and rain. There was no sign out front, just a rusted metal plaque and a path that curved like it didn't want to be followed. I paused outside the entrance. In my backpack was a folder labeled University of Oregon Undergraduate Research, Mental Health and Institutional Memory. A lie, but a soft one. Harmless on paper. College student senior thesis. A pretext built to open doors and not ask too much. Inside, the air was colder than I expected. Not just temperature, tone. Everything was beige and static. A receptionist barely glanced up as I explained why I was there. She pointed me toward the east wing, said someone would meet me. that someone was a nurse with tired eyes and a name tag that read Michelle. She didn't shake my hand, just walked beside me down a corridor lined with faded landscape paintings and chairs that hadn't been new since the 90s. "You've got 15 minutes, she said quietly. "Don't press her. Some days are clearer than others." I nodded, trying to match her tone. My throat was too dry for questions. At the end of the hall, she paused beside a door and glanced around before turning the handle. "Don't touch anything. Don't take photos." The door opened with a soft creak, and there she was. Dr. Lila Rowan sat by the window, folding and unfolding a paper napkin in her lap. Her hair was streaked with gray but pulled back neatly. Her posture was rigid but not tense, like she'd spent years pretending to be still. She didn't look at me when I stepped in, just kept folding. I took a slow breath. "My name is Emma," I said softly. "I think you're my mother." The napkin paused. She looked up, slowly. Her eyes were sharper than I expected. Not wild, not dulled, alert, focused. Then she said, almost to herself, "Your eyes." I swallowed. "You look like me," she added, "before they changed everything." I sat in the chair across from her. It wobbled slightly. The legs were uneven. "I found an article," I said. It said you were dead." She didn't laugh. She didn't blink. "That was the goal," she murmured. She kept folding the napkin, corner to corner, crease by crease. "My father," I began, "Gregory Carter." Her eyes flashed, just for a second. Then her face settled again. "He made this happen," she said. "He took you to silence me. It was all arranged. No court, no paper trail. Just money. Favors. Silence." I felt the heat rise behind my eyes. "Why did no one believe you?" Lila didn't answer right away. She looked toward the ceiling, then at the far wall. Her voice, when it returned, was steady. "Because I told the truth, and he gave them money." A silence fell between us, heavy and complicated. I glanced toward the corner of the room. The security camera was dark. Still, Lila looked at it every few seconds, like she didn't trust that it was truly off. "What happened to your work?" I asked. "To your records?" "Your reports." She folded the napkin one last time and placed it gently on the armrest. "I kept some things," she said, "before they locked my file." Then she smiled. Not with her mouth, but with something tired behind her eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "They don't like visitors who ask questions." Michelle returned, knocking gently on the doorframe. Lila straightened up instantly. Her shoulders squared, her hands folded neatly in her lap again. The mask returned like it had never left. I stood, legs shaky, heart too full. "Thank you," I whispered. As I stepped into the hall, Michelle didn't speak at first. We walked in silence for a few feet. Then, just before we turned the corner, she reached into her coat pocket and pressed something small and folded into my palm. Her voice barely rose above the hum of the overhead lights. "She kept everything," she said. "Drawer 3B. I looked at her. She didn't meet my eyes. Her name badge had a faint embroidered line beneath it. It was almost invisible, but I saw it. Rowan Foundation. I didn't ask questions, just nodded. The door clicked behind me as I stepped back into the cold air, and for the first time I believed it fully. She was alive, she was sane, and she was silenced. But not anymore. The fog never lifted that day. It clung to the trees like something with hands. Thick, low, unbothered by the passing hours. But somehow it sharpened me. Every step felt exact. Every breath mattered. Joan Merritt's cabin was tucked behind a winding gravel road outside Astoria. Her mailbox was rusted, the number half peeled. The house itself leaned slightly to the left, like even it had grown weary of the world. But there was something steady about it, lived in, resilient. I knocked once. No answer. Then the door creaked open just far enough for a voice to reach through. "You bring paper?" I blinked. "What?" "Paper. Not just files. Paper. Evidence people can't wipe with a keyboard." I pulled the folder from my backpack, held it up. She opened the door all the way. Joan Merritt looked exactly how I remembered from the grainy blog photos. Gray hair tucked under a knit cap, flannel shirt, eyes sharper than any headline. Her house smelled like old books and burnt coffee. A typewriter sat under the window, its keys still dusted with ash from the fireplace nearby. She didn't offer a welcome, just pointed me to the couch. "You sent me some big noise," she said, flipping through the file I'd scanned and emailed just yesterday. Silver Pine, Lila Rowan, that foundation. She didn't look up. "You sure you're ready to take them on?" "No," I said, "but I'm doing it anyway." She nodded once. "Good answer." For the next few hours, we spread everything out on her table. Printed articles, internal memos, scanned donation slips with Gregory Carter's name on the bottom line, patient logs, codes, dates, margins filled with Lila's slanted handwriting. Joan worked fast, scribbling notes, drawing lines between names. At one point, she pulled out a folder labeled Moss Creek 2006 and compared my documents with old whistleblower data from another case. "Same structure," she muttered. "Same kind of sanitizing language, same foundation style." She circled a paragraph. "See this? Patient deemed volatile. Transfer recommended." That's a tell. Means they were burying someone. We didn't talk much, but it wasn't silence. It was focus. When the sun dipped low and the fog grew denser, Joan turned on the lamp and lit the fireplace. She poured 2 mugs of tea. No sugar, no honey, just hot water and leaves. "I'll prep the drop," she said, pulling out 6 padded envelopes and laying them flat. Each one was labeled in sharp black marker. DA Contact, Seattle Whistleblower Collective, Denver 2 Investigative Reporters, both pseudonyms, Legal Support Group 1 to a podcast with a reputation for breaking dangerous truths. Into each envelope went a flash drive and a letter, handwritten. Joan said it was harder to fake ink. "What happens if something happens to us?" I asked. She didn't pause. "Then 6 others will know, and the story will live longer than we will." I stared at the fire. It hissed softly. "I'm scared," I said. "Good," she replied. "Means you're awake." The fire cracked once, like it agreed. Later, when she finished sealing the last envelope, I pulled out an old burner phone, the one I'd bought at a gas station south of Eugene. I scrolled to one number, the only number. I pressed call. It rang twice. Then his voice, steady, calm. The same voice that used to read me bedtime stories. "Emma." I said nothing. "I know what you've been doing." I closed my eyes. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." A pause. Then meet me. One last time. Train station. Tomorrow. He hung up. I stared at the phone until the screen went dark. Joan looked at me. "Was that him?" I nodded. She handed me a small key. "Mailbox across town, codes inside. If anything happens, drop the rest." We didn't say goodnight, just sat in the quiet, listening to the fire and the fog. Somewhere outside, the wind picked up. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a reckoning. He still looked like a father. Pressed coat, clean shoes, that same calm smile he wore when teaching me to ride a bike or when he signed my report cards with barely a glance. But now I could see it, the shadow behind the tie and smile. Not just a man who'd lied, but a man who had built his life on those lies. I spotted him before he saw me. Union Station wasn't busy that morning, just the quiet shuffle of travelers and the soft hiss of rain on the glass roof. I kept my hood up, stayed close to a column until I felt ready. I approached slowly, phone in my pocket buzzing with Joan's message. "It's out. Everything's live." Gregory sat on a wooden bench near track 6, legs crossed like he had all the time in the world. When he looked up, he smiled. "Emma." I sat without responding. "You've grown into someone determined," he said. I didn't return the pleasantry. "You could have told me the truth." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "We saved you. You were abandoned. She, Lila, was unwell. We gave you a life." "No," I said evenly. You took me. Because silencing her wasn't enough. You needed proof she didn't matter. He didn't flinch. That's not how it was. But that's what you did. The rain picked up, tapping the glass like it wanted to remind us time was still moving. He sighed. Emma, if this goes where I think it's going, people will get hurt. I looked him in the eye. They already have, for years, and it's over. His expression didn't change, but the air around him did, like he'd lost control of the script and didn't know how to flip the page. I stood. Goodbye. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed again. Joan. One word. Go. I didn't run. I just walked until the sound of trains faded, and all I could hear was the rhythm of my own breath. Later that afternoon, I stood at the edge of Silver Pine once more. The fog hadn't returned, but the sky still hung low, expectant. Michelle met me at the back. Her voice was low, urgent. Staff's been in disarray since the story broke. You have a window. I followed her through a side door, down a hallway I hadn't seen before. Less clean, less watched. We reached the familiar room. The door creaked the same way it had before. Lila was there, by the window. The same chair, the same folded hands, but this time, when she turned, her eyes were different. They were hopeful. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. I walked over, crouched beside her. We're leaving, I said. She blinked, slow, like she was making sure this wasn't part of the dream. Then she stood. Michelle handed me a clipboard, nodded once. Paperwork's loose now. Nobody's watching it. We didn't wait. No alarms, no shouting, just soft steps and a door that didn't lock behind us. The bus ride out of town was quiet. Lila sat beside me, holding my hand like she wasn't sure it was allowed. I didn't let go. Out the window, the Oregon pines rolled past like a moving painting, green, tall, ancient. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking backward. You're not alone anymore, I whispered. She didn't speak, but I felt her squeeze my hand just slightly, and that was enough. Later, in a small room where the radio played low and the news hadn't yet caught up with the truth, Joan's voice came through a podcast speaker. Her tone was clear, steady, unshaken. This story isn't just about one woman, she said. It's about what happens when truth stops knocking and kicks the door in. And somewhere inside me, I knew we hadn't ended something. We'd started it. I still remember my mother's hand holding mine on the bus ride out of Silver Pine. Small, thin, but for the first time in years, not shaking. Her eyes looking out into the Oregon pines were the same as mine. No fear, no resentment, just alive, finally breathing free. We can't change what's been hidden, but we can choose to step into the light. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs someone brave enough to listen. And if there's anything I've learned on this journey, it's that love isn't about blood. It's about choosing to protect each other, no matter how late it is. If this story reminds you of someone who has had the courage to step out of silence, tell it. Because sometimes a shared story is enough to keep the light alive for someone else.